Yeah, they didn't tell you what it was. They just put his face on it. So you're just going around talking to different people whose performances you enjoyed throughout the year?
Well, some of them I enjoyed, some of them less so, but it's that time of year, so everybody's kind of like,
Right.
chomping at the bit. But actually, this year, I got to say, it's been kind of a better year in terms of everything being good. There really aren't movies that they're not more than maybe one or two movies that I actually don't like this year.
Wow.
So it's kind of been a great year that way. There's not the movie where you go, oh my God, that's the movie that's going to win everything, and that's the film. But a lot of good movies.
Yeah.
A lot of actual, surprises fairly late. I mean, Out of the Furnace is fairly late into the game.
Yeah.
And
did you see it?
Yeah, I saw it at the premiere at the Chinese,
AFI.
at the giant screen.
Yeah.
It's a crazy way to see
think?
it. I think it's a movie that washes over you. I don't quite get on it personally. I don't quite get the subtext that some people were talking about and comparing to the Deer Hunter and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel that from the movie, but I did feel it was like kind of a great genre movie that was actually brought down to human level. So it wasn't played at the, Walking Tall level at all.
Mm-hmm.
But in some ways it's a Walking Tall movie. But the performances are so amazing that it kind of takes it down to someplace much more indie and much more earthbound and real, which I thought was kind of great.
That sounds about right.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, what would you say are what would you say would have made it sort of comparable to, or how would it have overlapped with the Deer Hunter? People who say that, what are they talking about?
I think they're just talking about the Iraq War element, and you were back 4 times, and right. I think they read it in a press release or something, and
I see,
they make the connection. But
well, I have to say
Scott thinks it's there. I mean, we talked to Scott last night. He seems to feel like there's that element there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that the movie doesn't, it's not sort of an issue movie or like a message movie. It doesn't, so maybe what you say about it kind of be in the sort of Walking Tall category, but sort of done in a different way, is right. That in some ways it's a plot, it's a very suspenseful or kind of, a movie about kind of revenge and justice and things like that. And the ideas are kind of the bigger picture ideas about the country and the economy or how we treat our veterans and things like that are not overt. They're not sort of on the surface at all. They might not even be on the second layer. But at least in my experience, making the movie was one in which I spent a lot of time thinking about definitely the kind of the experience of veterans and what that was like, and because I didn't really know a whole lot about it. And so the first thing you discover is statistics. It's like one in 3 homeless adults on the street is a veteran. That's pretty bad. Every 65 minutes, a veteran kills himself. That's 22 a day. That's pretty bad. And then you go like, wait a second, I didn't know that was going on. And you start to talk about, but that doesn't help you play the part. That has sort of no bearing on like what's happening or what you're going to do in the movie. That's just a statistic. And then, but I talked to try to get a handle on, well, what is going on for this character? Where's he coming from? It might not be a part of the movie kind of so much, but it's a part of a character, and that it's going to inform like how I play it and who I am, and it just gives you, it's sort of like a rope that you can kind of pull yourself into the part on. And I talked to a lot of not a lot, but some veterans who are from Vietnam, veterans that were from Desert Storm, veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan now, and there definitely was a kind of picture that started to emerge of a common experience, and that was something that moved me, and it was kind of harrowing, and what they went through day to day. What is life like over there? What is it like to know that, like, if you're out in the open, you could just be shot, at any point, and that happens to people that they know, and happens enough that that's what's going on in the back of their mind. And then when they come home, how do they adjust once their brain chemistry has been altered? And it has been altered by living 4 years and that under that kind of low level and sometimes super high level of anxiety and stress. How do you then just come home and make breakfast and go to the grocery store or go apply for a job at the gas station or whatever, and you can't, and you feel you know, you really feel terror, panic attacks and stuff like that all the time, and it's debilitating, even if you haven't lost a limb or something. So to sort of just going to scratch the surface, at least, on what the experience is like for those guys, it helped me a lot to think about, well, why is this guy getting into these bare knuckle fighting rings? Why is he self-destructive? Why is he so angry? Why does he have seem really subdued and sulky, and then have great outbursts of anger? Like, you know, that's a hard thing to try to understand, right? And it helped a lot talking to some of these guys and these issues that they were talking about, and these veterans, and then. So naturally, you get attached to some of those ideas, and I really wanted the film to address some of those ideas in some way, without kind of eclipsing the drama of the movie, which was this guy and his brother and this thing that happens, and he goes missing, and you don't want it to become kind of heavy-handed or didactic or, you know, just saccharine, and any of those things. You just have to avoid and hope that, you know, some of those things that you care about or that are important to you, and over the course of making the movie, just emerge. And I have no idea if they have or not, but some of the people that I've talked to have, those are the things that they have remarked on. They say, like, God, wasn't expecting this movie to be about, you know, what the experience of a veteran, or to be about, like, sort of what people, what life is like, you know, in a city that is just completely crumbling, and to feel no support, and, you know, and sort of what the bottom 20% or 10% is experiencing.
Well, in a state like that, it's probably the bottom 20%. It really, the country is so split up that way that there are areas where this is much more the norm than it is in California, say.
Yep.
It's just a very different experience in Michigan or in parts of Pennsylvania or, you know, Virginia or whatever.
Yeah, completely. And also in a place like that, you know, like, you've probably been to some very, very poor places, even if it's just a third world country, right? You go there, you see there are a sea of houses that are made entirely out of driftwood or something, and cardboard and sort of found materials. And that's one thing. To see an American city that was once something and is now something else, to see, like, you know, a community that was obviously once kind of a thriving community, you know, very robust economy. You could see the mills on either side of the residential areas. You can see that they had their very own amusement park right outside the city in Braddock, Pennsylvania, and now it's all gone. You know, that's a different picture. I like that, you know, and that's why, you know, the cinematography in this movie is pretty incredible, because it does capture, just on practically still images, you can see a story. You know, you see a house that was once, you know, a well-made, nice middle-class home, and now it's got tree branches growing out the windows, and it's covered in spray paint and boarded up. That's a story right there. And so I think Scott did a great job in kind of telling a story visually and using this setting. And then when I came onto the movie, he talked about shooting it in Lowell, Massachusetts. Massachusetts is something I know. I know what that was like. I know what that's like. And other places where it would be less expensive. And he kind of stuck to his guns and made it in Braddock, where, you know, he really wanted it. He wanted to set it, I think, partly because of, like, the steel industry. It's such an American story. Like, I remember seeing movies even from, it must have been the 80s. You know, there's a bunch of, like, Michael Keaton movies. It's about, like, the mill closing, and, you know, the guys all sitting on the porch drinking beer and
Ron Howard. We were talking about Ron Howard before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is kind of one of those movies in a way, you know. So there are a lot of kind of ideas in there, but it's not really, as you point out, it's not what the movie is about so much. But it's better than having a movie that's, like, doesn't have any ideas in it, you know.
Well, it has a lot. I mean, as you're talking about it, there's a lot of different versions of the movie going on inside the movie. I mean, there's a, you know, a country thing going on also. That's, you know, in terms of the bad guys. There's a, you know, the relationship of somebody who is still working at the mill and kind of trying to build that thing is kind of one other story, and your story is, you know, all of that's in there. So there are a lot of layers going on at the same time. How do you have the first conversation with Scott? Does he just call up and you read the script and start talking about it? Or?
Yep. So I got the script, I read it, and I thought, well, this could go either way. You know, it's like a very well written script, but it also has certain like genre elements. It's got certain, at times the dialogue seems kind of, I don't know, certain things seem like they could slip into cliche. It could be sort of very ordinary. But it's just a blueprint, and and many times movies can go either way, and it's just kind of like a starting point. And so I talked to Scott about it, and he had very smart things to say about it, and he seemed like he wanted to take it away from being Walking Tall and into being closer to being some of those movies that he feels so attached to, like Deer Hunter and stuff like that. And it seems like he wanted the movie to kind of sniff around at some of these ideas that we're talking about, but he was also very conscientious of not making it too heavy-handed and kind of putting it in people's faces. And I thought, like, okay, well, that sounds great. And I kind of feel like you have to, you obviously have to take this leap of faith when you join a movie, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm probably more cautious than most, because I really want to know that if, I want to trust the guy so much, or the lady so much, that if I'm gonna, that I'm feel free to be terrible, because I know that 80% of the time or more I'm gonna be terrible. I'll make bad choices, make mistakes, but I want to. That's what's fun about it, and I want to know that there's someone there who's not going to use the wrong stuff, that can tell good from bad, that is interested in the same things that I'm interested in. And Scott's one of those people, and I've worked with people who aren't like that, and maybe those movies are good too, but they're not. There weren't things that I didn't get excited by the things that they chose and how they put it together. And so once Scott's kind of made me trust him, and then I just jumped in. And
so is that decision the same decision as, say, working with David Lowery? Is that
yep,
kind of the same process, depending, regardless of what the budget is, the number of days, or anything else? You're kind of
yes. It's exactly the same process. And, sometimes it happens in 5 minutes. I sat down with David Lowery, I read the script, I went to meet him at a restaurant, and I knew right away, almost immediately, that I wanted to work with him. I just liked the way that he, literally the way that he kind of introduced himself. I guess it's like sort of a gut feeling, and you kind of walk into a room, you just get feelings about people, and sometimes you're wrong, but I had a really strong, good feeling about him. And then he talked about the character and the movie and and every time he said something, it was more exciting. It was better than what I thought about it. And I went, oh, that's a great idea. I thought it was like this, but you're definitely right. It's much better like that. And that's what the whole process was like with David. I don't know how that movie sort of came and went, but I don't know.
Well, it's deeply beloved by a lot of people.
Is it? Yeah. That's good.
I mean, in terms of critics and cineasts and everything else, it is one of those films that, very, very high on the list of people's films this year.
He'll be someone who'll make a great movie. Like, don't you think? Like, even if that's not a great movie, I don't know if it is or it isn't, but if it isn't, he will make, the next one will be great. And if that one isn't great, then I'm certain that I would work with him on anything he does, because I know that it's always he's going to be trying to do something that's interesting, and one of them is just going to be unbelievable.
Well, we live in a business where the judgment level is so weird now, because it's, like everybody wants, every movie or every piece of art of any kind, it's kind of like, that's it, and then nothing else before or after matters. And it's not that way. I mean, you can't, even the best filmmakers made some bad films.
Right, yeah.
It's like you can't really expect everything to always work exactly, but if pieces of it are, I mean, Ain't Nobody Saints is a terrific movie, but I'm just saying, in general, it's a weird tone out there.
It's kind of like high risk. You make one, it doesn't work, and you're
well, people want to make these judgments, and they want to, attach everything to it, and you're the worst person ever, or the best person ever, and there's no middle.
Yeah.
And as you say, if you're a filmmaker and you have the guts of a filmmaker, you're going to make something great, and maybe you'll make something that's not so great. You're making something that's terrible, and then you make something great again.
Yeah.
And you just never know.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I mean, it's expensive, and it seems like it's getting worse. I'm the wrong person to talk about the business side of movies with. I don't really follow those trends, but it does, even to the layman, it seems like because people are watching all the stuff on TV, they're trying to find a reason to, you know, how are they going to get people to the theater? So it has to be a big spectacle. It has to be like these 4-quadrant movies, and so there's a lot on the line. I mean, they're making movies for $200 million. That's a lot of money, man. So I get why it's really high stakes, and you're right. That's sort of antithetical to experimentation and, like, you know, artistic freedom and things that, you know, people like you and I guess kind of cherish and hope that directors are going to keep doing. But you know, it is exciting that a movie like this gets made, because you can see why it would be risky to people. I can see why, you know, they let scenes go, and he's making a movie that at some moments the studio group you could imagine would really balk at some of the choices that he was making, and he got the movie made, and they're supporting it and putting it out, distributing it, and that's encouraging.
Is it a character that feels different to you than, I mean, does it feel
my character
significantly different? Is it a change for you, do you think, or is it? Do you feel comfortable that you had this and I've got it? Or do you want to be a little scared of a character like this?
Oh my God, no, I did not have it, and I don't feel like I got it. But I've never felt that way. I was definitely scared. I mean, one of the challenges in this one was very boring, and wasn't like risky in any way, but it was still a challenge, which is the physicality of it, because it's just not my build, and it's not my thing to be a fighter, and it's not like playing a jockey in which you learn how to sit on the horse and you know what I mean, and or they put your head on top of a real small guy sitting on the horse. It's like I wanted the fights that I saw. These are real things. They have these bare knuckle fights. Go watch them on YouTube, or don't. They're brutal and horrible, but they looked really sloppy, messy. They're not professional looking. It's not Bourne Identity. It's like guys who kind of walk at each other and start throwing punches, and then they fall to the ground and just start punching each other in the face. And it's just like a really brutal street fight. And so I didn't have to look like Bruce Lee. You know, I didn't have to look so great and have kind of moves and stuff. But I still had to look like I could hurt somebody in a fight. And I'm probably not someone who could really hurt someone in a fight, you know, and so it took a good deal of help and training and stuff to get to that place. And then, so that was just one thing that's like completely separate from everything else you're doing in the movie. And
no, I feel like you acted that. I mean, I think in many ways, whatever the physicality was, that because as an audience, we believed that you were that desperate and that, you know, full of that energy and that rage, that's the most dangerous fighter. Whether they're the strongest guy or not, that the person who won't give up and won't be put down is the most dangerous guy in the room.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad that came across. I mean, I'm glad that, because I was imagining, you know, if we don't do it right, if what you just described is not apparent in the movie, people are going to roll their eyes at it. You know, they're going to go, it's just not going to be believable. Like the fighting isn't, the whole thing isn't. And so I'm very grateful that worked out. And that has to be, you know, that's a testament to Scott and the editor and how it's assembled. And, you know, it's so collaborative, man. It's like you can't take credit for the good things, and if you're going to sort of try to distance yourself from the terrible movies that you've been in and the horrible performances that you've given, you have to be willing to give away some of the credit when the movie works out right. You know what I mean?
So when you have a bad movie or a movie you feel is not a good movie, will you sometimes...
You can say bad movie.
Will you look at it and will you take pleasure in the moments that you felt you worked for you?
First of all, I won't look at it. And second of all, I will not take any pleasure, and if I'm forced to put my eyes upon it. And but that's kind of true for a lot of things. I'm just not somebody who's comfortable sort of watching the movies I've done, especially if they're good. Ain't Them Body Saints, you know, I never saw, and I didn't because I loved the process. I loved working with David Lowery. I loved working with Rooney and Ben, and it was. I wasn't really with Ben so much, but I just had a great time, and it felt really good. You know, I don't know. Sometimes I will think, you know, I'll be watching TV or just wake up and think, damn it, that's what David was talking about. I missed it. I want to go back and do that again. those little gremlins that like bubble up to the surface of my mind, I hate them. And but all in all, I really felt like satisfied, and I felt like pushed in the right ways, and I did things that I was sort of out of my comfort zone. Not enough maybe, but in other words, taking the long way around the barn to say that I really loved that, working on that movie, and so watching it would have sort of tainted the memory. Do you know what I'm saying? Because no matter what the movie was, I'm sure that it's sort of, I wouldn't have liked it as much as I like doing it. So I don't want to watch it. And I also don't want to start thinking about myself in those terms of, okay, oh, I see, that's what I look like when I make that face. That's what I look, now I'm going to do that again. And then suddenly you're just like doing faces and pulling things, and you're disconnected from like what feels good about acting. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Probably safe to watch Tower Heist.
Touche.
But does a movie does doing a big trailer movie, is there a different exercise? Is it fun to kind of do something where it's not so intense and it's not so, there's a lot of money around you, so you don't have to carry everything? And
I want to say yes, because I want to seem like a fun guy. It was fun times doing things, but it was
not your thing.
No, that's not really my thing either, because there's that's not my thing, because you spend there's just even more fat and less like protein. You're not doing the thing that is there's even less time spent doing the actual thing, and there's a lot more infrastructure, scaffolding, all this junk around you, and so I much prefer to do things where you know like Ain't Them Body Saints, but you can't always make a living doing that, and also it must be said that there are trillion worse ways to make a living, and that to complain about making a movie, like any movie, is you should be throttled. So I'm not complaining, but I would prefer to do something like Ain't Them Body Saints, where it's sort of all about the thing that I'm doing. Maybe that's selfish, but it's a lot more time spent on kind of thinking about the acting and the scenes and stuff than it is, trying to get the Macy's Day Parade and the 30,000 extras back to one and stuff. So.
When you got into acting in the first place, have you always had this attitude? Was that your take from the beginning, or were you kind of just wander in? How did you get into acting?
I got into acting because I had a teacher in high school. I started doing acting in high school, and he was just one of these guys who you kind of hope that your kids or you have once in your life. You know what I mean? Like, if you get one teacher who is that good and turns all the students on to that thing that he's teaching, and turns them on to learning, and just excites them, and they all love him. I had that guy, was my teacher, and I loved doing it. And I wasn't really interested, and I was doing other things, and I got talked into it, and I was asked to do the play over the summer at my high school. They do a musical, and they didn't have a single boy doing it. They needed one guy, because it was a romantic music. They needed they had to get one guy, and so and I thought, like, there are worse ways to spend the summer than with 19 girls in the basement of the theater department for a sophomore in high school. And so I signed up, and I was tone deaf completely, and I couldn't sing. I literally can't tell the difference between two notes on a piano. The musical director took me in his room, and he said, "Tell me which one's higher." This was after 2 weeks of trying to get me to sing. Played the two notes, and I couldn't tell which one was higher. And he said, "Okay, you're tone deaf, so we're going to have to be creative with this." And they cut my solos. They literally asked me to mouth the words in the chorus, but I didn't care at all. I had a blast, and that was the beginning of my acting career. And then I did all the plays in high school after that, and that was really were my formative years. I'm sure people go like, "Yeah, high school theater or whatever." I learned everything, almost everything that I know now, and the kind of the work ethic and all the tools of preparation I learned from this guy. It was amazing. He gave me so much in my life. I'm so grateful to him, and So I said, like, I'm an actor. I'm not going to college. I'm going to drive out to Hollywood, California, and I didn't know anyone who had worked in anything other than an extra in a show movie had come to Boston, or a TV show here, episode here or there. And I went out to LA and I got an agent, a friend of mine. We both drove across country to LA after high school, and I found an agent, after being there for like months. And then I had a few auditions, and they were all daytime teen TV, Saved by the Bell kind of stuff. And then I was moving back east. I said I hated it, and I was moving back east, and I got an audition for To Die For, mostly because they were looking for kids from New England, I think. Mm. And so I went and read for the casting director, 100 times, and then I finally got to meet Gus Van Sant. And I just stumbled onto another like amazingly generous spirit and brilliant guy. And so I went from this high school teacher to working on this movie called To Die For with Gus. And that started a kind of new phase in my acting, and Gus was kind enough to include me in a long series of movies that he did, and in a bunch of different ways. I worked as an editor for him on Finding Forrester, and Harris Savides was shooting that, a brilliant Harris Savides, and he and Harris would, I would edit on the stage with them, so they'd shoot and I'd edit, and by lunchtime I'd have a kind of rough cut put together, and they'd come, and so I'd have Gus Van Sant and Harris Savides sort of looking at what I had cut, which was terrible, and they're sort of talking about it. It was like the best one-on-one free film school you could ever possibly hope for. And then I did another movie with him as an actor. I did To Die For, and I did Good Will Hunting, and I did Jerry, and those were all with Gus. And he could have used anyone, and he was nice enough to use me and to always be patient with me and teach me. And I owe him a debt I'll never be able to repay. And then.
It kind of sets a standard, no, for you, what you expect out of directors. I mean, Gus is kind of a high bar for you to match.
He is. It's and I don't, the relationship that I have had with him, the things I've gotten out of the professional relationship I have with him have never really been equaled, and I've been super lucky to work with Andrew Dominik, who's incredible. He's one of the very best. Just like uniquely talented and makes, I think, beautiful movies, and then Gus, and then Ben, who is also amazing, and David Lowery, and Scott Cooper. I feel like I kind of Zelig. I just like stumble into these like amazing situations, and then I also have had to earn a living at times and go do movies that I haven't liked, and every time I've done it I have felt like, okay, that's it, I'm never doing this again. I'd rather I'll go work at a restaurant. I've done it before. I'll go do construction. I've done it before. I'm never gonna go do a movie that I hate, because it kind of saps all of the joy out of doing something that I really love doing. I like acting. Mm-hmm. I love it, and I don't want to do it in a way that makes it not fun. And
did you feel like the Dominik movie was a corner turner for you in terms of your career?
Well, definitely in terms of someone believing that I was capable of doing a kind of leading role in a very difficult part in a big movie. He had faith in me that no one has had, really, maybe except for Gus. That was the only time someone had said, I believe in you, you can do this. And I'm gonna, it's the whole movie rides on it, and you gotta deliver all these things. And he's also, not only did he say that, but he's someone who had like an incredibly precise vision for what he wanted. So he wasn't just saying, do your best, whatever you do, it'll be amazing. It was like, he sees things, in a way. It's like, he's kind of like, it's like the way Bobby Fischer sees like a chess table. He just kind of sees every variation to play a scene. He'll tell you, okay, what do you think? How are you going to play this scene? And you have any ideas? And you go like, well, this is happening, that's happening. I want this, I don't want that. I'm afraid of this. I'm really hoping for that. And he'll say, yeah. There's also this, one A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So let's just start at the beginning, and and the direction that I had seen him give other actors was always a reminder that no matter what my kind of knee-jerk reaction to something he would say to me would be, I had better listen to him, because I'd only ever seen him make people better. You know, I'd see people, actors playing a scene, and Andrew would say, yeah, try it like this, and they'd go, like that? That doesn't sound very good, you know, and they would argue or resist, and they were always wrong. He was always right. And so I learned quickly, shut up and try your hardest to do it the way he wants it, because he's got great ideas, and he's right, and he's the director, you know, and you've got to play for the coach, you know, something Lou Reed said, which Andrew liked to repeat, and it's a good way to make movies, and it's a way that I like to work with a director, because for one thing, it takes the burden off of you having to figure it all out. You can just do your part, you know, and so after Andrew, I don't know why I started talking about that, but yeah, there was Andrew, and there was Ben, and there was Gus, and David Lowery, and Scott Cooper, and people. I feel, honestly, I really sort of confused at how lucky I've been, and on the other hand, when you know, you start doing press and talking about a movie, when I start doing press and talking about a movie, especially a movie like this, it makes me very antsy to go back to work. I wanna find something that I like again, and I just start thinking about all the things I wasn't able to accomplish in the performance, and the beats that I missed, and the ways that I wasn't able to see what was happening, and I just want to like get back out there, you know, and I want someone to give me a shot again. And you know, with Jesse James, I kind of thought, well, this is the, you know, I'll never ask for anything again, you know. This is the break of a lifetime, part of a lifetime. I'm happy. I'll go do something else after this. And the minute it was done, I was like, damn it, give me something good. And I want some universe, give me a great part, because I'm ready to fight. I want to get back out there. And
so you're probably never going to feel like you hit it out of the park. It's never going to be perfect for you.
No, I doubt it. If I can feel okay about it, that's fine. And I've learned I'm also okay just enjoying doing it. I don't have to like love the performance in the end. I don't have to be happy with the movie. Just so long as I get a chance to like work with people that excite me, and they like Andrew or Scott, or people who say, here's an idea, you know, and you go, damn, I never thought of that. That's a great idea. Let me try that. That's the best you can hope for.
And when people get excited as they are about this performance in Out of the Furnace, are you even conscious of it? Are you concerned about it? Are you?
No, it's, I mean, look, you know, maybe lying. Any actor's lying if they say like it. I don't want anyone to like what I do. I mean, if I didn't want people to see movies that I've done, I would just go like collect trash and found objects and be a sculptor of, you know, scrap metal. But I do enjoy, like, I like that people see it. I've been in a lot of movies that people haven't seen, and I've been in a lot of movies that I wish people hadn't seen. And so when you're in a movie that some people are seeing and you're okay with it, that's great.
But you're not looking for love on Twitter, or you're not like, were you reading reviews at all, or are you doing any of that?
Nope. But I just read an article in the LA Times today on the way over here about how actors who aren't on Twitter, the studios aren't going to hire them anymore. And I was like, how do I get on Twitter? What do I have to? I literally was like, I searched Twitter on my phone. I was like, they're not going to hire me anymore. How do I get on Twitter? And then I was like, they don't hire me anyway. You know what I mean? Like, I'm always the guy that people have to fight for. When I get on set, people look at me and they go like, dude, do you have any idea what I went through to get you this job? And I'm like, no, I don't. But I can imagine. So that might just be my lot in life. So I'm going to spare myself the Twitter experience, I think.